going to talk about what is the importance of the terms in the agreement. Okay, so let's watch.
So using this Zoom, nowadays I think this is becoming very common. I guess this is what they call the new normal, I think. Anyway, thank you, Suren. Thank you, MCM. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to everybody. Though I can't see you guys, I hope everybody's staying safe, right? So today's topic will generally wrap around the idea of term sheet, as to what is term sheet and how do we use this particular piece of documents to actually safeguard our investment and so on, right? So next slide. Right. So before I go to this slide, I'll just generally let you guys know why to use a term sheet, right? Basically, when you do a transaction, typically an investment transaction, whatever nature it can be, you will actually end up having a whole set of documents, right? But at the point of you trying to commit your investment, you always have an issue of whereby, do you get all the documents prepared and sign one go before you put in the money? Or do you sign a mutual understanding, which is the term sheet that actually lays down whatever terms that you guys have principally agreed on, pay the money, and then formalize whatever that needs to be formalized? A lot of people in Malaysia actually are not so fond of using term sheets because we are used to the idea that give me sign all the documents, then I pay money, right? This is like the norm that we have always been thought of. But unfortunately, it's actually a very common thing across the world, right? Because I do a lot of global documents, and then more often than not, a lot of times we actually end up signing a term sheet before we invest a couple of $1 million or hundreds of millions of dollars. This basically because there's a lot of logistics, discussions, negotiations involved, trying to finalize those definitive agreements, so to speak, right? So hence, that's why we actually put up a foundation which starts from the term sheet. And generally, the definitive agreement wouldn't run far from the term sheet. More or less, everything will be there, like your equity participation, your conversion right, your amount of equity that you're going to put in, your funding, what is it for, and so on and so on, right? So that's basically where the term sheet comes in. So this slide you guys can see on your screen or your mobile that goes. So what is a cooperative, right? A lot of people will be wondering, like, what is a cooperative? Why cooperacy? So basically, cooperacy is an entity, something for layman terms, for ease of understanding, is something like a listed company, but less governed than a listed company. So as you all know, a listed company is actually governed by Security Commission Malaysia, right? Whereas a cooperacy is actually governed by the Corporation Commission, Suruhanjaya Koperasi Malaysia. So they actually have an act called the Akta Koperasi that governs how a cooperative can be used to actually raise funds, invest, support a certain group of people. So when I say certain group of people, it actually goes back to the foundations of that cooperative as to what do they do. Say, for example, if you have a Koperasi Anggota Police Malaysia, so you know that this cooperative is for the police forces. So people who are the police forces will subscribe in their time of service to the corporation. They pay a certain fee, they subscribe to the thing. Once they retire, they get a certain benefits out of it. And then what the cooperative does is that when they pull the funds together, the cooperative actually invests in buy lands and all those things. So you guys have heard of Felda, I'm sure. Felda obviously is listed, but before it actually went to the listing stage, obviously it went through a cooperative before it was actually changed to Sdn Bhd and then into a listed company and so on. So you also have LTAT, Lembaga Tentera Angkatan Tentera Malaysia. So you have all these cooperatives, which is actually very common. But obviously, there are different sizes of cooperative. And it's also very important that we understand that this is not new. And more often than not, investors actually prefer to use cooperatives to actually raise funds because they can legally issue shares and it's much easily governed compared to Berhad, for example. And obviously, Sdn Bhd, you will have the issue of limitation because you can't have too many shareholders. And obviously, sole proprietor is out of the question, and partnerships sometimes may get things complicated. But obviously, there are preference to use LLP, which is a better option than partnership, the traditional partnership, but it's more flexible than the traditional Sdn Bhd. So LLP is actually I wouldn't say a new set of a type of a company, but it's quite commonly being used nowadays. I think basically because the world is changing, so people are moving to a more innovative and more flexible type of a corporate structure or a shareholding structure in order to enable the investment to be a bit more flexible and a bit more lively to suit and change into whatever situation that calls for. Next slide. So yeah, like I was saying, the limited liability partnership. So just drawing a difference between a limited liability partnership and Sendirian Berhad, a lot of times it's because, say for example, Sendirian Berhad, you're obligated to have a company secretary. Your company secretary has to pass a certain resolution pursuant to a certain act, and then all these things have to be duly filed and so on. And so the bookkeeping, the structure becomes very rigid. Whereas in this situation, when you use the LLP, things become a bit more flexible. So the GP has a better control as to how it can structure the investment, how it can control the LLP, how the equity will flow, what are each party's roles, and a number of things that actually lay out the principles of the investment. Imagine if you were to enter into an agreement or investment agreement through a Berhad or a Sendirian Berhad that matters, you obviously will have to go through the company secretary. Your memorandum and articles will actually have to suggest to you whether you're allowed to do so or carry such things. And you will more often than not come across certain companies that actually have limitations that you cannot invest in so thing, and then you need a board approval of how much, and your investment amount has to be above how much, then only we can come across. So all this becomes very rigid. And as you all can understand, investment is a very flexible and a case-to-case basis, right? So more often than not, you actually need flexibility to actually drive your investment, because if something is too rigid, and given our economic change that's actually changing very frequent, this more often than not will become an issue or pose some challenges to the GP and to the investment fund per se. Next slide. All right, so term sheet is what I mentioned earlier. So the video just now actually gave a brief idea as to what is term sheet, right? Why did the term sheet ever come about? So like I mentioned, term sheet is very crucial when it comes to putting in place certain points, principles, and the essence and the gist of your investment, right? Sometimes the term sheet can run across 10, 15 pages, something like an agreement, but not an agreement. Sometimes the term sheet can be as simple as 1 pager or 2 pager. It's all fair, all right? There's no right or wrong. There's no fixed set of rules. But the idea is that it is to capture and put in words the essential terms that you guys have agreed upon. And the definitive agreement will be in place. And it could be a number of documents that form the definitive agreement. And from there on, you will actually sign the thing at a later stage. But you will actually use the term sheet to actually make your investment, crystallize your contract, form the basis of your contract, and so on until the investment is actually being completed. So a lot of times you have definitive agreements that can incorporate from a share subscription agreement, a shareholders agreement, a management agreement, debt conversion agreement, an option agreement. All these things could run to like hundreds of pages, right? But it can be shortened into a term sheet which is like about 8 pages or 10. That's just figuratively, just so that you understand the idea of it. Next slide. So this is a sample of a term sheet. Basically, you can read from here is that it just encapsulates, you see, at a glance of this term sheet, you know when is this term sheet dated, who is the issuer of the term sheet, who are the investor, who are the founding shareholders, what's the actual valuation, what's the current valuation, what's the paid up, what's the investment, and what's the new money that's going in. So in an instance itself, like 1 pager and 1 short form, you will actually capture most of the important information that you would actually need to establish before you can put your money in. Like if I were reading this, I would know that the investor is actually a corporacy. So this investment is done through a corporacy. So who are the founding shareholders? You know that these investors are these people are the investment, the actual valuation. So you know how much you're going in for, so that like what the video mentioned, you know when is your exit. So what's the paid up capital in case anything goes wrong, how much can it be paid? Investment amount, how much are we looking at investing? Next slide. So carrying on, so you will see that what's the instrument of the investment. So it's an ordinary share. So issue of the shares will be how much per shares, at what discount, no ordinary shares to be issued, number of ordinary shares to be issued, then what are the undertakings, what's the first right of refusal. So obviously whenever you do an investment in an all term sheet, it always captures a number of things. One of them would be the undertaking. So what are the undertakings by each person? So this essentially determines the roles and responsibility. Then from there on, you also have the first right of refusal. More often than not, you will want the company to actually buy off your shares, or you will want to buy off the company shares, vice versa, depending on the situation. And based on this, you will also be able to identify whether what is the risk that's going on into the investment and whether you want to invest or not. Next slide. So going on, you'll be able to see the costs and expenses. So basically, who bears the legal fees, you or the investor or the investee? What's the buyback guarantee, and what's the yearly coupon that you're looking at? So if you can imagine in context what as I mentioned, if you were to read these 3 slides in one pager, in the graphs itself, you will actually understand what's the investment structure like per se, rather than you going through a set of documents that's like God knows how many pages, depending on the lawyer drafting and depending how much the lawyer is going to charge. So the documents might vary, but no matter how much does the document vary, because each person might actually have a different way of structuring a document, writing a document, all that, the essential terms that is in the term sheet will actually capture the essence of your contract, your obligation, and your investment spirit. Next slide. So this is another term sheet. So this term sheet you can see is different from it's the same from the previous one. So this term sheet, it actually highlights like global brand partners. So from there, you can see what's the subject matter, what's the details. So you can see that it is proposed through a deposit and loan in accordance to the Akta Koperasi. So you have to understand that, like what I mentioned, why a lot of people use Koperasi to actually do these investments is that it's actually governed under the Corporation Act to actually do investment, right? So it's not like you need like some fancy license to do crowdfunding, or you need like fancy license to make an investment or anything of that nature. You don't need any application or what. By the act itself, you are allowed to do so through a deposit or through a loan. So you can always do a convertible loan stock to convert your loan into shares. This is allowed. That will actually give you a better access, because a loan convertible stock means that it's a loan and you're not a shareholder unless you convert it into stock. That gives you an option to make sure that the money goes in at a certain time and the KPIs hit, then you convert, so that it also safeguards you as the investor, and there's a control mechanism exercised by the corporation before it's actually being converted. Next slide. So the description of the business is, so usually the term sheet will also state the description of the business. So what are the what is it doing? So like in this case, it's GPP. So it actually says that it's a wholesale trade of variety of goods without dominant product in footwear, apparel, accessories, and global distribution. And you can also see that the target amount sought is like 10 million and dispersed in 2 tranches in equal value of 5 million each. So this will actually highlight that total amount of money that has to be gone into the system from this corporation. Next. So you can see from this instrument that the project dividend will be across 18 months, a minimum of 25,000 placement of deposit and loan for 10%, payable every 6 months once, right? Then you can see the project dividend payable is the last week of the first half per annum, within 14 working days from the expiry of the maturity period holders. That will be the redemption period. Next slide. So more importantly, you want to know that because it's a loan stock convertible, what is your debt priority? So where are you prioritized in terms of the company? So obviously here you are ranked above. And the liquidation preference is that you receive 1 time of the deposit loan amount deposited in preference against the holders of ordinary shares, which is in your favor as an investor. Next slide. So the utilization of fund is for business requirements, 30% for development of main products and research, 10% for operation expansion, 40% for market expansion, 20% for online retail expansion. So usually you would actually state these kind of terms in the term sheet just to govern, to make sure that the funds are actually controlled and there's a controlled usage of funds. This is to ensure that each allocation and sort of KPI, so to speak, is actually hit so that the funds are controlled and used for business-related purposes and not to pay off any bad debt or any shareholder advances. Next slide. So obviously, whenever we do this kind of investments, more often than not, MCM, we actually get exclusivity in terms when it comes to the project management. This is also in favor of you guys because when they are appointed as the project management consultant, PMC, they represent you guys to actually negotiate the best terms and then govern the project and look after everything. Because otherwise, you would actually imagine a situation whereby hundreds of us actually go to the company itself asking for a quarterly report, monthly report, what happened to this, what happened to that investment, how can I need more money. And a lot of expertise and a lot of professionals will be involved in this kind of negotiation and transaction. So it's not something that can be seemingly easy, but not that straightforward. So this has to be understood, and hence why you would generally require a PMC to do this on your behalf. And obviously, because when PMC does these kind of services, they are allowed to charge a certain PMC fee to reimburse whatever time costs and efforts has been put into managing this project, right? And some of the people that get involved usually in these kind of things is professionals like accountants, auditors, financial advisors, lawyers, people who have experience in this kind of project management field. All these people, honestly speaking, do not come cheap. They come at a cost, and obviously their expertise vary from industry to industry, and that is also factors that has to be taken into account before project is put up together. Next slide. So this is a letter of entitlement. So a couple of things that you can see here is that from the letter of entitlement, every early bird entitlement becomes, you can waive your license fee by 50,000, right? So you can also see that each license shall be valid for 3 years, which is the first term, and renewable as a license for the second term, with a 50% rebate on the prevailing license fee. Performance incentive will be at 30,000, and then you will see on your screen a minimum minimum quantity, a KPI that you have to hit in order to be eligible for that performance incentive. So what is a letter of entitlement is basically telling you a contract or an entitlement letter telling you that if you achieve ABC, you will get DEF. It's as simple as that. And this just states down the foundation as to what's your commitment like in order to be entitled to a certain benefits. Next slide. Okay, so following from just now that one, this part of it actually basically reads out to you that company's commitment to buy out at the entire business at a fixed rate of 100,000. The buyback shall be paid in cash or in shares or a mixture. And further, you shall be entitled to the following as your Kickstart bundle package, which actually entitles you to 100 cups free each store and replenishment for free and redemption. Then your entitlement of RM1 per cup shall be computed after every Sunday and remitted on every Wednesday. This is quite simple and straightforward. So just lay down that what are your basic package that you're entitled to when you invest in this particular project. Next slide.